In power from 1997 to 2007, Tony Blair is certainly one of modern Britain's most influential prime ministers. He came to power riding an unprecedented torrent of support, but left as one of the most hated men in Britain. So how did this happen, and what is his legacy? Anthony Charles LYNTON Blair was born in Edinburgh on the 6th of May 1953. He was sent to Fettes College, an elite independent school that his parents struggled to afford. Studying law at St John's College, Oxford, he went on to follow in his father's footsteps and became a barrister. He displayed little enthusiasm for politics until he met his future wife, Cherie Booth, a campaigning socialist. Over the next few years, he would become increasingly involved in the Labour Party, and he was eventually elected in 1983 to the safe Labour seat of Sedgefield, a tight-knit former mining district in northeastern England. His entry into politics coincided with the rise of the New Right, spearheaded by Thatcher, and this seemed to shape his beliefs. By the time he entered Labour's shadow cabinet in 1988, he had become a leading outspoken figure trying to move the party to the political centre. Until then, Labour had largely been dominated by devout socialists, and this made them unelectable. In fact, their 1983 manifesto was seen as so out of touch that it was dubbed the longest suicide note in history. In 1992, John Smith was elected Labour leader, and he appointed Blair Shadow Home Secretary. When Smith died suddenly in May 1994, Blair seized the opportunity, and in July he was elected party leader with 57% of the vote. This was surprising. Many thought the post would go to Gordon Brown, then Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. Along with Blair, Brown had also been outspoken of his wishes to modernise the party, but with Captain Charisma's popularity on the rise, Brown reluctantly agreed to step aside. The two came to an understanding that Blair would back Brown as his eventual successor. By 1995, Tony Blair had transformed the Labour Party. He had abandoned its pledge to socialism in Clause 4 of its constitution and made unprecedented commitments to free market enterprise and tackling crime. Blair had even made friends in the upper echelons of the business world. Case in point, Rupert Murdoch. His press empire had to this point backed the Conservatives tooth and nail, but sensing swaying public opinion, it bailed and endorsed Blair's rebranded New Labour instead. It was finally in 1997, with the Tories mired in infighting and allegations of sleaze, that Blair steamrolled into the Commons. He secured victory with a majority of 179 seats, unmatched by any previous Labour leader. At 43, he was now the youngest Prime Minister since 1812.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
Blair would go on to win two more general elections, 2001 and 2005, before his decade in power was over. Throughout, he abided by the political philosophy of the Third Way. Professed by sociologist Anthony Giddens, this is an attempt to fuse social democracy with a dedication to the free market. Peter Mandelson explained it pretty well. New Labour is intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich as long as they pay their taxes. For a while, this appealed to the soft left and the soft right, and pretty much everyone in the middle. But to quote-unquote old Labour, this was a betrayal of the working class. Blair's style of governing was also something new. Seen as presidential by many, Robin Butler also famously described his cabinet as a sofa government, criticising its seemingly relaxed and informal decision-making. Tony, as he commonly told ministers to call him, also made use of unofficial and unelected special advisors, or SPADs for short, bypassing the civil service. Secretive meetings became the norm, and it became quite hard to discern who was actually informing decisions. The growing public wariness of Blair's secretive ministry was only compounded by allegations of sleaze and corruption. He came to power in 1997 promising to clean up politics.
We will be tough on sleaze and tough on the causes of sleaze.
But somehow he managed to do the exact opposite. One of the first stories to surface came to be known as the Eccleston Affair. After announcing a ban on tobacco advertisements in sport, an unusual exception was made for Formula 1. It turns out that the CEO of F1, Bernie Eccleston, had previously donated £1 million to the Labour Party, and had met Blair privately at Downing Street.
Give a donation expecting something in return?
No, I didn't want anything. I still don't want anything, to be honest.
Even more incriminating were Blair's dealings with Dick Evans, head of BAE Systems, Britain's biggest arms dealer. A year into government, Blair had personally approved the sale of Hawk jets to Indonesia's dictatorship, which was ethnically cleansing thousands in East Timor. Worse than that was BAE's record £40 billion arms deal to Saudi Arabia that was shrouded in corruption. The Serious Fraud Office investigated and uncovered damning evidence that would wreck BAE, but the investigation was quickly cut short after political pressure from Whitehall and Riyadh. Even when outside of office, however, Blair was eager to do the bidding of the uber-wealthy. He turned to enriching himself at all costs, appearing in literal propaganda videos for dictators and hoovering up millions from autocrats who, let's just say, benefited enormously from his foreign policy. All in all, the Blair Rich Project, as it was dubbed, tainted not only Blair's but Britain's reputation. After all, this was a former Prime Minister engaged in dodgy money-making schemes.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
But as corrupt as it was, the Sofa government did see a variety of accomplishments. A national minimum wage was introduced for the first time. The Bank of England was granted the power to determine interest rates without government consultation. Referendums were organised to kickstart devolution in Scotland and Wales, and the post of Mayor of London was established. But Blair's finest hour came in helping negotiate the Good Friday Agreement that ended 3 decades of conflict in Northern Ireland.
A day like today, I mean, it's not a day for sort of sound bites, really. We can leave those at home, but I feel the hand of history upon our shoulder in respect of this. I really do.
Yet his efforts at home were complemented with a new type of British foreign policy: interventionism. Blair championed the West's right to police the Third World as it saw fit, and so in his first 6 years in office, he took the country into 5 different wars, more than any other Prime Minister. His first taste of blood came in the form of the 1998 bombing raid on Iraq, as part of Bill Clinton's Operation Desert Fox. This was just the beginning. In Kosovo, to stop a massacre, Blair convinced Clinton to launch another. The attack violated international law and escalated the killing on both sides. But hey, some Kosovan kids were now named after him. Military intervention in Sierra Leone shortly followed, and the media hailed these events as successes, and Blair a hero.
Holy shit, man!
It was in the wake of 9/11, however, that Blair pledged his allegiance to the American empire.
This is not a battle between the United States of America and terrorism, but between the free and democratic world and terrorism.
Soon, he would follow Bush to the caves of Afghanistan, contributing to the deaths of almost 100,000 civilians since the destruction of one of the world's poorest countries. But the war that came to define Tony Blair as Prime Minister was of course the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea to remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
Blair campaigned for the Iraq War as a moral crusade and as a self-defense measure. Along with Bush and co. in America, he cited the human rights abuses of the Iraqi government and the apparent growing threat of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction.
This is not the time to falter. This is the time for this House, not just this government or indeed this Prime Minister, but for this House to give a lead. To show that we will stand up for what we know to be right. To show that we will confront the tyrannies and dictatorships and terrorists who put our way of life at risk. To show at the moment of decision that we have the courage to do the right thing. I beg to move the motion.
Despite the protests of millions, the resignations of cabinet members Robin Cook and Claire Short, and absolutely no approval from the United Nations, 45,000 British troops, along with forces from America and Australia, entered Iraq on the 20th of March 2003. While Saddam was toppled within months, the ensuing conflict lasted over 8 years. The death toll is estimated from as low as 300,000 to over 1 million. To this day, Blair insists that Iraq would somehow be worse if Saddam had stayed in power, but the birth of ISIS would say otherwise. Worst of all is the fact that the very premise of the war was a lie. In 2014, the Iraq Inquiry, or Chilcot Report, laid out this fact in stone. There had been no weapons of mass destruction, no links with Al-Qaeda and 9/11, and no urgent threat to Britain or the British public. Blair eventually resigned in 2007, following growing pressure within the party and dwindling approval ratings. At home, he left Labour an identity crisis, and Britain trust issues. His most damning legacy, however, was of course in the Middle East. Blair saw Iraq as his Falklands. It became his Suez.
No one told
way. Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear. When it hasn't been your day, a week, a month, or even your year.